So in the previous lesson, we have implemented automatic scrolling behavior to the current timeline item on timeline page, not only on the initial page load, but also when we try to navigate to a timeline page from another page. In both of these cases, the page will be automatically scrolled to the current timeline item. And today we're going to improve scrolling behavior and implement functionality which will allow us to scroll the page to a particular timeline item by clicking on the hour label of the corresponding timeline item component. And as for now, we can see that by clicking on hour label, the page is automatically scrolled to the very beginning. So let's start and open the component when markup for this hour label is defined. It is within timeline item component. And now, since we have to implement behavior of scrolling after clicking on hour label, that means we have to use click event directive to register listener for the click event. At the same time, we're gonna use modifier which will allow us to prevent default browser behavior when clicking on links. It is prevent modifier. And once this event occurs, in other words, when we click on the hour label, we're going to fire a custom event with the name scroll to hour to parent component. And with this event, we also have to pass some additional data to let parent component know which timeline item component we have to scroll to. So let's just fetch an hour which current timeline item component responsible for. We can do so by referencing our property on timeline item object, like so. And this timeline item object gets passed within this component as a prop with the name timeline item. So right now let's declare new event with the name scroll to hour and assign validation function to the payload of this event. And since payload will be an hour, we should validate hour value by using isHourValid function. This way we're making sure that the hours will only be greater or equal to 0 and less or equal to 23. And before going any further, let's import isHourValid function in this file. And now that we are firing custom event scroll to hour back to the timeline component, and along with this event we're passing current hour, which this timeline item component is responsible for. So let's go to the timeline component and register appropriate listener by using scroll to hour event name. And this component will be responsible for scrolling the page to the timeline item, hour label of which we have clicked on. So right now we're going to have to make this scroll to current timeline item function a little bit more generic, because by using this function, we will not only scroll the page to the current timeline item, but also to a particular timeline item. So let's rename this function and call it scroll to hour. And the hour which we are going to scroll to will be received as a parameter within this function. Let's name this parameter hour. And it's gonna work like this. After clicking on a particular hour label, scroll to hour event gets sent from timeline item component to the timeline component. And this event also contains payload, which equals to the current hour, which gets passed to the first parameter of this handler function, scroll to hour. So right now we no longer need to determine the hour which we're planning to scroll to by using this statement. Let's comment it out, because the hour that we need to scroll to is received within first parameter hour, and we're going to use this parameter within the body of this function instead of current hour constant, like this. But of course, to make the previous behavior work, when we were automatically scrolling the page to the current timeline item on the initial page load, by calling scroll to current timeline item function, and here we need to modify code a little bit. Let's move this line on top of this function call. And right now, since this function no longer exists, we're going to rename it on our new function, scroll to hour. And this function needs first parameter, which is an hour we're supposed to scroll to. And by making this scroll to hour function receive one parameter, we were able to make it generic enough so that it can handle the case of scrolling the page to the current timeline item, as well as all other cases to scroll to a particular timeline item that we can specify as a first parameter. So now it's a good time to check it out in the browser. I'm gonna click on the hour label and let's see what is going to happen. You may notice that the page gets instantly scrolled to the clicked hour. And of course, the previous behavior of scrolling the page to the current timeline item on initial page load remains. As we can see, after the refresh, the page was scrolled to the current hour, which is in my case 12 p.m. And when trying to navigate to timeline page from another page, the page is also scrolled to the appropriate timeline item hour. And at this point, we're good to finish this lesson.